Welcome to The Explainer, everyone. Today, we're diving headfirst into a truly chilling local legend and trying to figure out exactly why it survived for almost 100 years. We're going to unpack how one simple ghost story actually connects to universal human fears, global folklore, and, well, our own psychology. It's a pretty wild ride, taking us from a dark, lonely roadside in the Midwest all the way to modern pop culture. Let's get into it.
Okay, so I want you to really put yourself in this scenario for a second. Imagine you're driving down a dark, super isolated road late at night. The radio's playing softly, your headlights are just barely cutting through the gloom, and then, suddenly, those headlights wash over a figure standing right on the shoulder of the road. It's a young woman, and she's completely alone. So ask yourself, would you stop? Would you actually pick up a lone hitchhiker in the pitch black? It's a setup that naturally puts us totally on edge, right? And it happens to be the exact premise of literally one of the most famous urban legends in American history.
Enter Resurrection Mary. Now, if you're from the Chicago area, you've definitely heard her name. She's almost always described as this young, really fashionable blonde woman, maybe mid-20s, wearing a 1930s white ball gown and dancing shoes. And she supposedly wanders this one very specific stretch of road, Archer Avenue, in Chicago's southwest suburbs. The local lore says she's the victim of a terrible tragedy, struck and killed by a hit-and-run driver on a rainy night while walking home from a dance at the O. Henry Ballroom. Ever since then, the story goes she's just been out there, trying to hitch a ride home.
So how did this whole thing start? Let's look at the timeline. Back in 1921, O. Henry Park, which housed that big ballroom, opened up. Fast forward a bit to 1927, and a young woman named Anna Norkus was killed in a tragic hit-and-run auto accident on her way home from that exact spot. A lot of paranormal investigators actually point to her as the real identity of our ghost. But the legend itself? That really exploded in the 1930s. This guy named Jerry Pallas claimed he spent a night dancing with a young blonde woman named Mary. He specifically remembered her hands being ice cold. He offered her a ride home, but as they were driving up Archer Avenue, he said she literally vanished from the moving car. Didn't even open the door. The crazy part? The next day, he goes to the address she gave him, only for her mother to tell him Mary had died years ago. And the stories didn't stop there. Throughout the 70s, multiple cab drivers swore they picked up a young woman in a white dress who just disappeared from their back seats. Then, even as recently as 1980, a couple named the Rudnikoskis reported driving past a woman in a white gown, glowing with this weird white aura on the side of the road. What's really fascinating to me is just how baked into the local culture this story has become. It's not just some spooky campfire tale, it's practically community heritage. Literally right across the street from Mary's supposed resting place is a tavern called Chet's Melody Lounge, and the staff there has this amazing weekly tradition. Every single Sunday, they mix a Bloody Mary and leave it sitting right at the very end of the bar. Now, obviously, Mary hasn't shown up to claim her drink yet, but it's just such a perfect example of how communities embrace and celebrate their own folklore.
Now, the key to all of this is that Mary's story is anchored to a very real, very physical place. Because whenever she supposedly vanishes from a car, it's almost always right in front of Resurrection Catholic Cemetery in Justice, Illinois. And guys, this isn't some small, forgotten graveyard tucked away in the woods. It's a massive 397-acre property that's been there since 1904. It's an incredibly prominent site. To put it in perspective, Pope John Paul II actually visited it twice, once in 1969, before he was Pope, and again in 1979. Plus, it features this absolutely massive Art Deco mausoleum that was built in '69. And actually, speaking of that mausoleum, it holds a literal Guinness World Record. The building has 2,448 stained glass panels. That makes it the largest stained glass window in the entire world. But what's really wild is that it's not just your standard religious iconography. We're talking 22,000 square feet of glass that attempts to tell the entire story of humanity. If you look closely at these panels, yeah, you'll see the Garden of Eden and Noah's Ark, but you'll also see some totally unexpected modern stuff, like dinosaurs, airplanes, and no joke, even a nuclear mushroom cloud. It is a stunning, deeply bizarre resting place for Chicago's most famous phantom.
But okay, to truly understand Resurrection Mary, we need to zoom out a bit and look at the academic side of how stories like this actually work. Mary is a textbook example of an urban legend. That term was really popularized by a folklorist named Jan Brunfond back in 1981. His research basically brought the study of modern folklore into serious academia. He proved that these aren't just silly stories we tell to scare each other, they're widely circulated pieces of modern folklore that reflect our collective culture, our deep anxieties, and our societal norms. And this perfectly illustrates how the whole woman in white trope is a massive global phenomenon. The parallels across different cultures are just striking. While we've got Mary in Chicago as the tragic hit-and-run victim, down in Mexico you have La Llorona, the weeping woman who supposedly drowned her children and now searches for them along the waterways. Out in San Francisco, there's the urban ghost of Flora Somerton, who fled a forced marriage. Over in the Philippines, the White Lady of Quezon City serves as a cautionary tale for night travelers. Do you see the pattern? These legends are everywhere. They all feature a woman in white, they all have a deeply tragic backstory, and they almost always serve as a sort of warning to travelers. Let's actually look a bit closer at Flora Somerton from San Francisco for a second, because her story really highlights the themes of betrayal and lost love that anchor so many of these legends. Back in 1876, Flora was an 18-year-old heiress whose parents were forcing her into an arranged marriage with this older, wealthy guy. Well, legend has it she fled right before the ceremony, running away while still wearing her white ball gown. But here is what makes her story uniquely tragic. Wait for it. 50 years later, a woman's body was found in a hotel room in Butte, Montana, wearing that exact same white wedding dress. And supposedly, the room was just covered in newspaper clippings about Flora's disappearance. It's this incredibly sad tale of romantic woe that fuels the modern ghost sightings of her wandering down California street today. You see, these stories endure because of their emotional core. They aren't just trying to make you jump, they're tapping into very real, very deep human sorrow and grief. Take La Llorona, for example. The lore says she was denied entry into heaven until she could find the children she drowned. So people who claim to see her near rivers don't just see some generic, scary apparition. They hear this agonizing, heartbreaking wail. ¿Dónde están mis hijos? Where are my children? It's that profound, inescapable sadness that makes the woman in white such a compelling, totally timeless figure in human storytelling. And because these archetypes are just so universally understood, modern media loves to borrow them and mix them up. For instance, back in 2005, the hit TV show Supernatural basically based its entire first episode on this folklore. But the creators did something really clever. They took the classic American vanishing hitchhiker legend, exactly like Resurrection Mary, and they literally smashed it together with the Mexican legend of La Llorona. By doing that, they created a completely brand new, highly compelling narrative for a modern audience. Just look at how this show flipped the script on the character's motivation. In the traditional La Llorona folklore, the tragedy is basically entirely the woman's fault, right? She drowns her kids to run away with a lover, who then ultimately rejects her. But in Supernatural, the ghost, whose name is Constance, commits the tragedy while she's suffering from temporary insanity, and that insanity is directly caused by her husband's infidelity. So the writers totally shifted the catalyst. They moved the blame from the woman's betrayal over to the man's betrayal. This one change creates a massive role reversal. Think about it. Instead of a passive ghost who just sits and weeps by a river or a sad hitchhiker who quietly vanishes from your back seat, pop culture completely empowered the female ghost. In the show, this spirit actively uses her sexuality to hitchhike, seduce, and hunt down unfaithful men on the highway. She redirects her vengeance. It takes a sorrowful victim and turns her into this active, vengeful force. It just goes to show how we still constantly adapt folklore to fit modern audiences who crave driven characters, even in death. But here's a question for you. Whether she's an active hunter or a passive hitchhiker, why do these stories almost always happen on dark roads or bridges? Well, that connects directly to our own psychology. Think about a bridge during the day. It's just a piece of infrastructure that gets us over an obstacle. No big deal. But at night, when it's pitch black and our vision is super limited, traversing a dark road or bridge naturally induces major anxiety. It acts like a symbolic portal. You're crossing a threshold from the familiar into unfamiliar territory, into the unknown. We aren't really afraid of the bridge itself. We're afraid of what we can't see. Our brains are basically primed to expect the unexpected, which makes it the absolute perfect psychological canvas for a ghost story. And that brings us right back to you, the traveler behind the wheel. We've explored the local history, the global folklore, and the psychology behind why these stories stick around forever. They tap into our deepest fears of the unknown, of tragedy, and of isolation. So the main thing you should take away from this explainer is that urban legends,
They are way more than just scary stories. They're a mirror reflecting human nature itself. Which leaves me with one final question for you. The next time you're driving alone down a dark, isolated road and your headlights catch a quick glimpse of something on the shoulder, will you just tell yourself it's a trick of the light? Or will you wonder if you've just met the woman in white? Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and hey, stay curious out there.